Hello and welcome to AWS Made Easy. We are the show where we have guests from the AWS community talk about generative AI and FinOps and try to answer your questions to help make your AWS journey easier and hopefully a little bit less expensive. My name's Stephen Barr.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rahul Subramaniam. And what a show we have today. We have Bowen with us today. Bowen, do you want to just quickly introduce yourself? We're so excited to have you on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name is Bowen Wang. I'm the Principal Product Marketing Manager for AWS Cloud Financial Management Services. What that means is, well, we are part of the organization called AWS Commerce Platform. So
Oh, that's a new name I've heard. That's the first time I'm hearing of that one.
Yeah. An easy way to understand Commerce Platform is we kind of translate how much you use on AWS into how much you owe to AWS. So your usage to your AWS bills. And we manage the whole life cycle of your spend from when you incur those usage, when you want to monitor those usage, understand opportunities to optimize and save, and maybe you want to forecast, etc. And we also have another department for fraud detection. So basically take care of you for the entire life cycle of when you have the usage to when you need to pay us.
That's pretty awesome. I have so many more questions that we're going to dive into in just a bit. But tell us a little bit about your background. How did you get to being here at AWS and being specifically in FinOps?
Yes, that's a very interesting journey. So I started with AWS actually 11 years ago, back in 2013, when every organization, you guys probably know, as shall I migrate to the cloud? What's the benefit of the cloud? The thing, is it safe, etc. So I started during that era, right? Basically helped AWS, lots of the product teams to set up the story about how to get started with AWS, the whole benefit. Don't just take a look at cost savings. There are other opportunities, maybe the whole ecosystems, how you can learn from other customers and partners, and think about all the staff productivity and agility you can get from the cloud resources. But back in 2019, I had an opportunity to work with someone from cloud economics teams from AWS. And I just got fascinated about how great of the value propositions they put together. We call it the cloud value framework, right? They have the 5 pillars. Now we just added sustainability as the 6th pillar to that whole framework, and started to have opportunities to talk to customers, especially the business and technology leaders, and give them kind of the line of sight of all the things you need to take a look at it. And when I was at FinOps X in San Diego a few months ago, I realized that they also started the FinOps Foundation officially starting back in 2019. So my journey within FinOps kind of coincidentally aligned with the FinOps Foundation. In 2020, I felt like I talked to customers a lot about how you can save money, how you can understand, analyze, but I want to be closer to the actual tooling side of the business. So in 2020, I joined the service teams. That's the whole billing cost management services and console services, and became their principal product marketing manager. And now, 4 years later, it's definitely a lot of exciting things. We work with customers and partners. And just last year we joined FinOps Foundations. I feel like the stories, all the dots are connected at this moment. Yeah.
Now, definitely things are evolving so amazingly. Before we dive right in, we'd love to give you a small gift, Stephen.
Yes, this is a thank you for us for being on the show. It's got a pretty cool set of sunglasses, a shirt, a coffee mug, some other cool things. So thank you so much for coming on the show. We really appreciate you being here.
You guys are very sweet.
It's a bit of a drive for you. So.
Oh no, my family loves swag. Like my husband definitely will wear that, and the whole family will use it. Thank you so much.
All right, awesome. Yeah. I've got a few more swags that if you like, okay. I've got a couple.
Yes, it'll make his life really nice.
Awesome. Cool.
That is so awesome.
Cool. I'll put it here. Okay.
Yeah, so Bowen, there's so many questions, that are coming up. You said we'd look. The new acronym that I just heard was ACP, right? Which is AWS Again, I've forgotten what the new one was. What is it
The
called
commerce.
again? The Commerce
Um,
Plan.
we have so many acronyms. So within Commerce Platform, we have AIO, which is our organization. That stands for AWS Insights and Optimization. So it gives you the analysis, the data, the platform you need to analyze and understand your spend, and we give you recommendations to save. So yes, there's so many acronyms. I'm happy to spell it out. Each time if I say some acronym, just stop me. I can spell it out
No,
for you.
there's some new ones because I mean, even within the cloud financial management, the CFM teams, like we'd heard of so many different acronyms. This one is actually completely new to me. Not heard this before. And the
Yeah.
other interesting ratio of sorts that you were talking about is actually quite interesting, which is how much you use versus how much you owe AWS, right?
Yep.
Now, conventional wisdom says what you use in a month, you pay at the end of, or you owe at the end of the month. How's, is it any more complicated than that?
So not get into too much of the details, we do have different cycles of how we compute your usage. There's certain things that's pretty straightforward. Your usage, we have the pricings for each service, then we do a billing computation and translate into the numbers you see on your AWS bills. There's also, we call it out of the cycle billing computation. For example, there are certain discounts we have to compute afterwards. But each month, if you see your bills, maybe a few days delayed after the month is completed, you'll be able to see everything. But behind the scenes, the commerce platform actually have trillions of billing items we have to process and make sure it's actually aligned with your basically unique business terms negotiated between yourself and AWS. And each customer is in a different scenarios, right? We obviously offer things such as very public available, such as like volume discounts. If you use lots of services, obviously, right, you get some discounts. But other than that, depending on the different purchase strategies you have with AWS, we definitely need to take into consideration of the unique discounts and terms you have with AWS.
I do have a
Yeah.
follow up on that. When we say how much users use the services and how much they owe, is this like a metric that users should be also following? And is there a good and a bad end of the spectrum? So, what would
With
good look like on that measure?
Yes, that's that that's it's $1 million questions. A lot of our customers and trying to understand like you convinced me of the values, right, to migrate to AWS and build in AWS. But in the same time, we want to make sure we have the optimum efficiencies of building in the cloud, right? And some of the leaders, they might look at the total bills and they believe that, whoa, the bill got increased over the past few months. Can you tell us why? And by the way, if you want to understand why, we do have services, right? Such as cost anomaly detection. If somehow your usage pattern is completely different from the past few months, we will actually give you a report and tell you maybe this account or this service is worth for you to dive deeper into. But other than that, sometimes the increase of bill is a healthy thing, right? Because your businesses are growing in a very nice trajectory. You have more customers, maybe log into your website, etc. So one of the metrics we always advise customers to use is a unit metric, right? Take a look at your total bills versus your usage, and maybe you will be surprised to see the unit metrics or unit cost of your service is actually going down because you're being very efficient about scheduling your resources. There's no waste or minimum waste in your total applications. So unit metrics at the service level or at the business metrics level, which is the unit economics number, is something a lot of enterprise has been paying attention to, right? Do not just take a look at the total number on your bills. Maybe take a look at maybe your AWS bill divided by the transactions you have, right? Whether the process you have that matters to your business, and to understand how much you're actually paying for AWS or any cloud service provider. in the context of your like value-driven business transactions. That's a better way to take a look at if you're efficient using your cloud resources.
Got it. But particularly on that measure that you were talking about, which is usage versus what you owe AWS, should we think of that as a metric at all? And if yes, then what does good on that scale look like? Like, should you be using more than what you owe AWS, or should you be using less than what you owe AWS? Should be half? Should be one and a half, or should be two? Like, what from your standpoint, from AWS's standpoint, what do you consider good and what do you consider bad?
So what we think about is we can use actually one of the tools called Cost Explorer, right? Let's use EC2 as an example. So if you go to EC2, you can actually drill down into the service level cost, right? So you understand your EC2 cost, let's say by day or hour. And then you can also filter by the usage of EC2. You can quickly download that report to do a kind of unit cost of your EC2, right? How much am I spending in the past and how much usage I have incurred with EC2. And I think to your questions, is there kind of like a golden number I need to hit, right, in terms of the best percentage of my usage versus my cost? My advice is to benchmark yourself. Because in the past, that's how you've been using AWS EC2 services. You can take a look at the usage by price point. And then over the time, if you have included very healthy, let's say, savings plans and RIs coverage, you've been able to leverage all the discounts, and you can see that unit cost started to trending down, which is a good thing, right? I feel like the benchmark, that's another thing we are starting to pay attention to, which maybe we can provide as an AWS perspective to our customers with a good benchmark. That's something we need to collect more data from. But from the customer perspective, you can start to do that. And with Cost Explorer, right now we have 38 months of data, which means you can like go back to 3 years of data to get your own benchmark as a starting point.
And so you see the business cycles play out several times, right? So you have seasonality that you can adjust for, all the different things that you'd want to deal with depending on what kind of business you were.
Exactly. So I think that's a better benchmark for yourself. And feel free to like reach out if the customer has account teams. We'll be able to do a we call it cloud financial management capability assessment. So the capability assessment, we really sit down in a one-on-one setting. Like we evaluate you with all the things you are doing, right? Do you have a dedicated team? We call it Cloud Center of Excellence or FinOps practitioners. Do you have the right reportings available for all of your stakeholders, whether they are at the leadership level or end users? Do you have forecasting? How often do you do forecasting? Like how accurate is your forecasting number compared with your budget and number?
Okay, so this is Amazon helping their customers kind of develop their FinOps practice and best practices to make sure, they have, because Amazon has the perspective of what works best.
Yes.
Whereas if you're at one company, you only have yourself and your industry contacts.
Yeah. So we have about like 30 plus capabilities, right? For each angle, we will give you kind of assessment. Are you kind of getting there? Maybe you'll rate you like 1 to 2, or if you're extremely mature in that capability, right? We'll give you 5. So at the end of the assessment, you kind of have a snapshot view of where you are at today. And over the years, we can also have basically a benchmarking number for the industry, and you can compare yourself versus all of the best practices in the industry and to see where the gap is and work with AWS, either using native tools or a few teams you mentioned, like the TAMS, Concierge, and Optics teams, to get yourself there. Yeah.
That's actually really, really interesting. I think it's also an interesting way to kind of let's break this down. The show, of course, is called AWS Made Easy, which means we're trying to simplify things for the audience and make it as simple as possible to consume. So why don't we break this up? Because like you just said, different customers are at different places in the spectrum of capabilities around FinOps. So why don't we break it up into 3 or 4 sections? The first one being a newbie, someone who's just getting started with AWS, 200 plus services to kind of wrap their heads around, costs and efficiency being one of them. What would your advice be for someone who's just starting off? And I'd like to kind of analyze this across multiple dimensions. There are tons of different tools that are there in the AWS, portfolio. Sometimes even that can get overwhelmed. Just for billing and efficiency, there's tons of tools. So, what would be your recommendation for an absolute newbie just getting started? Let's say a college kid, decided to get onto AWS for their college programs or was doing a one-off, project on the side, building up their skills, doing the certifications, whatever. So, what is your advice for someone like that who's just getting started
Yes.
to monitor and manage their spend?
But by the way, I really love your show name, AWS Made Easy. I work on taglines for our services on a daily basis. I think you guys give this the more concise and just really value-driven tagline.
Oh,
So, so that's a good name, AWS Made Easy. So that makes sense. To answer your question, if you just get started, you don't know how much am I spending. I don't have a BIE team or a cloud center of excellence trying to process a lot of data. Maybe you're not there yet. The easy way is to log into your AWS console and find billing and the cost management console, which we just launched this new console experience at last year's reInvent. So previously, we kind of asked you to use your muscle memory to remember where did I use AWS billing or cost management or tagging, etc. But last year, we kind of combined these two experiences into one AWS billing and a cost management console. So you can be a college student and you can access to a billing cost management console. And when land on this console, you will have that widgetized treatment of a landing page with all the key information you need to know about what is my past month of spends. They have a quick service breakdown of the top services you're using. Maybe use RDS or QuickSight or anything. So you kind of see, oh, how much do I use by service, right? And there's another widget gives you alert or recommendation, which means that, hey, take a look at this alerts to make sure this is what you are intending to do or to use. And then from that billing and cost management console, you basically you can just have your morning cup of coffee and realize that everything is healthy, or I need to spend some time within this account or within this service to make sure everything is normal or growing as healthy as you intend them to be. And within that same landing page.
Okay, so just to summarize. Okay,
Yeah.
so if you are just starting out, you're a college student,
Yep.
that's where you start. Is that the billing and cost, the landing page of
Yep.
the management console, and then the billing and cost management, where you can actually get a look at, make sure everything's healthy, and if you keep an eye on that on a daily basis, that can really tell you, okay, did I leave some SageMaker on or something like that?
Yep.
I was thinking about this. On the one hand, like in absolute terms, the stakes are lower, but in proportional terms, I was thinking about, okay, when I was in college, my net worth was $200 in an '88 Ford pickup, and so it's pretty easy to spend my entire net worth on AWS in a day if you're not careful.
Yep.
So in that sense, the stakes are highest when you're just starting out.
Yes. I forgot to mention one thing. In your case, log into Billing Cost Management Console, also enable Cost Explorer. Once you enable Cost Explorer, which is our native cost visualization tool, the cost anomaly detection will be auto-configured for you. So if you have anything that is out of your usage pattern, we will send you alert and emails. So we don't actually wait for you to log into the console. We will send you an email, or you can even configure Slack messages and SMS. You can get alerted if something that worth your attention. So that's another thing that's cost anomaly detection is, again, free of charge. It's definitely for AWS to monitor on your behalf and analyze and take into consideration of seasonalities and everything.
Okay. Okay. So if you're just getting started, turn on the anomaly detection so you don't have any
Exactly.
surprises, especially because you don't know, right?
Yeah.
And you just don't have an intuitive feel for how expensive things are, that kind of thing.
Yeah, or how much am I supposed to spend based on, maybe I've been very careful at the very beginning and then maybe somehow get a little bit too passionate about experimenting things and forgetting turning things off.
Well, it's really easy to all of a sudden, you configure a loop wrong and you send 100,000 SQS messages, right? That's easy to make that kind of mistake.
Yes, we want to capture things before it snowballs into a problem that make you regret for some of the experiments you do. But yes, Cost Explorer, Billing Cost Management Console, and Cost Anomaly Detection will be the things that's just free of charge, easy insights and notifications you can get while you are building. Yeah.
I think those are great tips. I would just add two other things to that list. The first one, from my experience, is that you want to also set up the budget alert. So you can set up a budget in the console and say, if I ever cross this amount, and that's a total amount, you might be at $50 a month. And you're like, if I'm trending towards any more than, $35, then send me an email or send me an alert. That I have found to be very helpful, especially for newbies who are just getting started. Half the time you don't know what you're doing. At least you want to protect yourself from, runaway costs. So if at any point of time you hit a certain threshold of spend, you want to be alerted about it immediately so that you can act on it. And then the second one is more about developing muscle around just getting organized. When you're a newbie, you tend to just start instances willy-nilly, use objects in your S3 buckets all over the place without tagging them. You might launch different services as you're playing around with them. And one of the things that you should start developing muscle memory around is tagging everything that you do. Because once you learn the discipline of tagging, then organizing and analyzing your spend becomes much easier as stuff gets more and more complicated. Funnily enough, when you're a very large organization, things are relatively more organized. But when you're just a newbie getting started, you will have things all over the place in different services, in different regions, in different availability zones. And for one person to track exactly where things are starts getting really hard. So you'll literally you might have to wait till the end of the month to look at your bill and see, oh, in this particular zone I got charged so much, or in this particular region I got charged so much, and you just forgot that by default you opened your console and it was in a particular region, you launched instances over there. Larger organizations I found to be generally more disciplined because they set up organizational policies and stuff to say you're going to launch instances only in these regions and none other. But you don't have those controls and things as a newbie. So just building muscle memory around tagging and making sure that everything is organized goes a long way in being efficient.
Thanks for bringing these two services or features up. Definitely AWS budgets, very good service to give you kind of the sense of what is the threshold I do not want to cross. I think lots of people are actually trying to use budgets and cost anomaly detection together. So think about budgets, it's very intentional dollar amount, right? Maybe I use $50. I do not want my spend per month to exceed $100. So set that amount and we will alert you when it's either projected to be like $100 or actual $100. You can actually set the threshold notification. But for cost anomaly detection, let's say you always spend $50, sometimes it go to $60. But one month, if you spend $89, we will still alert you because it's different. Even though it's not exactly at the $100 threshold you set for yourself. So use these two services together will help you have this kind of peace of mind. I did not cross the threshold I set for myself. At in the same time, from the AWS perspective, my usage pattern is still within the normal range.
Okay, because you don't want to get to 95% of the way through your threshold, 10% of the way through the month, unless, well, at least you want to know. Like maybe you put your project on Reddit and it got popular, and so you got a bunch of usage. And it's, okay, that's great. I'm happy with that. I'm willing to pay, but not, okay, I accidentally misconfigured something.
Exactly. And for cost anomaly detection, it also gives you a root cause analysis. So, okay, something is not normal. What is the potential reasons? They actually prioritize the ranking of reasons. Maybe this account or this service, this region, like you mentioned. So you can save some time to really analyze what's the driver of your cost increase. But Rahul, for your point about tagging, that's a great point. For some reason, I forgot about that tip. It's definitely like job zero. Like everybody needs to have this habit. Maybe you're a college user, you don't have to have a tagging dictionary. But for a company, no matter which size you are, you need to have a good tagging, we call it dictionary, and make sure that everybody follow the same spellings and acronyms you have, maybe upper lowercase, and make sure you actually include information that's important for you, whether it's at department level, project level, initiative level, etc. But the good news for teams or organizations who forgot about tagging at the very initial stage of your cloud adoption journey, at least with AWS, we have another feature called cost categories that can help you add this metadata you mentioned with tagging later on. And you realize that, oh, our tagging is not very consistent, or I forgot to tag my accounts or resources. You can use cost categories to add those metadata and create your account structures and be able to kind of distribute costs in that way. So cost categories is also one way to add metadata and also a way for you to allocate costs based on the logics you want.
And then especially with something like that, I think it's a lot easier to clean it up as you go rather than start from scratch when you've already got a few hundred or a few thousand different resources going.
Yes.
Right? You can always clean it up. You can always have a especially with AI now, right?
Mm-hmm.
You could really easily say, okay, here's all my tags, do some entity resolution and make them all consistent. Like that, you could write that script pretty quickly.
Yes.
But if you're starting from nowhere and you've got no metadata at all, and okay, who owns what and what does what?
Yes.
That would be that'd be hard.
It's hard to really create this kind of accountability, because if you only have one bill, you never do your charge back to the actual business entity, then everybody is enjoying the same benefits. And sometimes the people who use the most actually have the most benefits from, for example, savings plans, if you purchase centrally and have them benefit from the discounts.
I remember an accounting professor I had, and he said, imagine you're going out to dinner with friends and you agree beforehand, we're all going to split the bill evenly, no matter what. Well, I'm ordering the lobster, the steak, and the most expensive whiskey on the menu.
Yes.
You get that kind of...
Yeah, you need to make sure you ask the person to Venmo you afterwards.
Yeah, he was a great professor.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. Yes, and also I forgot to mention cost categories can be retroactively applied for the past 12 months. So if you set the rules, you'll be able to apply that to the previous 12-month usage.
So you can track down who ordered the steak and lobster and get them
12
to
months
Venmo
ago.
you.
Yes, exactly.
So, but just going back to, I want to do this in a little more organized way where we're sticking to the profile. So I have one last follow-up question on this particular profile. This is, again, we're talking about the newbies. So if you're talking about newbies specifically, the last time I checked, there wasn't a mechanism where you could set a hard limit and say, if my bill is more than $100, just shut everything off. Don't let any other EC2 instance run. Don't let any SageMaker instances run. Just shut everything off. I cannot spend more than $100. There's no way to do that today, correct?
We actually have a feature I would definitely advise you guys to look into. So that's also AWS budgets. You mentioned budgets earlier, right? So budgets has a feature called budget actions. So budget actions, if you set up properly, let's say if somehow my budget threshold is exceeded at this amount, you can actually stop running EC2 or RDS instances or apply SCP policies to the specific entity and stop them from accessing certain resources. So you can apply some or add some teeth to your cost governance mechanisms by using budget actions. And I'm sure there's a lot of maybe DIOS solutions you can use to trigger if certain threshold is met. You can terminate resources. But budget action is a natively supported services. I definitely advise customers to take a look into that one.
That's a great tip. Yeah. Okay, let's move on to the next persona. The next persona is a little more advanced, and here we're talking about someone who is dealing with 3 or 4 different accounts. They've got 3 or 4 projects running in parallel. May not necessarily, or let's say they are a team. Let's say it's a startup. 3 or 4 people, 3 or 4 different accounts. They're trying to work together collaboratively. Above and beyond what we just discussed for a newbie, what else would we advise them to do? Should they set up organizations at this point? Should they set up trusted advisor at this point? Should they just set up a whole lot of the other tools? Like, what would be most appropriate, let's say, for a startup that's just, you know, trying to find their feet?
Yeah, I would. So if you are already a startup company, right? You understand the different setup of AWS at this point. Tagging and cost categories, like you mentioned, is still very important. Make sure you make the data meaningful for you. Otherwise, it's just a build. It's just a long build. You do not know what that means, right? Metadata is still job number one to make sure you can relate what incurred from AWS to your company, whether it's projects and you mentioned there's a few accounts. AWS organizations is definitely a good idea. So you understand a specific account, because account is a natural segmentation of spend. If you can be very intentional when you set up the account, you did a very good job to start with, right? And I'm trying to think about different things on top of that kind of the newbie experience or tools. So depending on whether you want to make your own rules in your organization, meaning that, yes, I have cost categories, I have taggings, I have accounts. That's how I want to maybe distribute my bills. Like Steven mentioned, at the end of the big launch, how I want to distribute the bills. Sometimes it may not be that mutually exclusive, meaning that it might not be that easy for you to just use accounts or taggings to distribute the bills if you're already running a startup company, right? Another thing I'm thinking about is look into Billing Conductor. That's another service. A lot of the companies may not be aware at this moment just because we have so many services. So Billing Conductor, I feel like startup company or enterprise customers both might be benefited from it, is you can group accounts into billing group and also be able to add additional pricing rules on top of those billing group, meaning that that's my pricing point between myself and AWS. I may or may not want to have that to be the same pricing point for this specific billing group. I want to add additional markup, or I want to share my some of this maybe data transfer cost into these two billing groups proportionally, so that makes sense to them based on the projects they're working on. So that will be something you can start to have this habit of, I can own my own destiny. I can own the own configuration of pricing point, right? You're almost running IT as a business at that moment. So I think that's a good entry point as well. And I'm trying to think about another service, like I think cost and usage report. Maybe another thing you can start to have the habit to download and maybe create your own dashboards if you want, to combine with the business data I mentioned earlier, the whole unit metrics idea. Yes, so that will be something I think about. I know you two probably think about other things. Happy to hear your opinions as well.
Well, yeah, the one I wanted to add is, when I first started learning about the cost and usage report, it's a lot, right? But now that we've got generative AI, have that help you with your queries. And also, I want to do a shameless plug. We've got a cost and usage report tutorial. So if you are just getting started with your cost and usage report, check out our blog post on the cost and usage report fundamentals. It's got some sample queries in there. But yeah, if you're just getting started, I do find that generative AI can help you. It's not going to give you a perfect query necessarily, but it's a lot easier than starting with, select star from, it's great. So use that to help. And the same thing, when you have your cur data, you can also use generative AI to visualize it, right? You don't have to start with an empty Plotly or whatever, however you're going to do it.
Yes. Cost usage reports is very helpful in terms of it gives you the most granular data ever, right? You can download, you can do a lot of the customized analysis on top of that. But I do agree with you. We have internally cur dictionary, like there's all the column names. You try to understand what that means. It can be time consuming for any customers who start to understand the definition of different columns. I think the query libraries you mentioned that you offer will be a good starting point. So basically, that's all the example queries. You probably can answer most of the common use cases and take a look at those existing like CURL libraries and examples, and then you can basically improvise on top of that to add more complex queries for your own kind of the problems or questions you want to answer.
I guess a follow-up question. Wait, sorry, go ahead. Oh, well, and okay, so at this level of spend, so say it's I don't know, 10 to 50,000. What does your relationship with AWS look like at that point? So at that point, you may not have even gotten on the phone or on Chime with somebody, right? How do you start developing that relationship?
So you're right. We definitely have a big cloud financial management community. We talk to customers either like through like one-on-one if you have dedicated, we call it TAMs, or like account teams. If you're not there, we still have a community of experts you can reach out to. And then we have AWS forums. You can leave questions. A lot of our like CFM SMEs, they're very actively like post responses to that. They even compete who's faster to provide those responses. A lot of this like Twitch shows we have within AWS. We have like summits and roadshows. There's a lot of things that's actually free of charge for you to kind of connect with experts, either virtually or in person. So I definitely would advise that, and just to kind of get into the community, right? Find a person you feel like you look up to that you can find answers with. That will be something I definitely talk about. And online, there's so many documentations and blog posts and the latest like news announcements. There's so many best practices, and like you said, CURL library is one example. We have a well architect CURL library as well.
Yes,
definitely.
That's a great.
Yeah,
resource.
definitely leverage those existing documentations, because if you just get started, most likely your answers are somewhere available online or with some experts.
Okay.
I'll add maybe a couple of things over here from my experience. When you go from an individual, setup to having 3, 4, 5 different people who are then working on AWS, and not everyone is necessarily an expert at everything over there. There is, I call this phase kind of setting up your trust boundaries. Because if you're a founder, if you're the person who owns the P&L, and suddenly there are people who are going to be, coming in and spending a bunch of money, you want to make sure that there are at least certain boundaries that are set up, because every mistake can be expensive, and some mistakes, when multiplied by 5, 6, 7 people, can be that much more expensive. So I'd say there are 2 things that help over here. The first one is definitely start with organizations. I think this is kind of a place where you're large enough where AWS organization actually makes sense. You're going to do multiple accounts, one for prod, one for dev, one for staging or something like that, and you might do one for experiments, whatever. Organize it in a certain way, like you were saying. It's a logical way to think about organizing yourself. But with that come 2 specific tools that become very useful. The first one is organizational rules or policies. With organizational policies, you can basically decide, hey, we are not going to be launching SageMaker instances, the P types or the PD types, which are going to cost us, tens, if not 50s or $50 an hour on these. So we are going to limit ourselves to these set of instances or instance types for the kind of work we do. And if you need to launch anything else, come talk to us. Let's make a conscious decision about what kind of instances we are launching, where we are launching, and so on. So this might be a great place where you just, start thinking about what kind of boundaries you want to set for how everyone in the organization starts using it. And so setting up organizational policies is one way of doing it. The other one is also setting up permission boundaries. So no matter what individual owners in each account decide they want to give permissions to, when an account is part of an organization, you can override that with permission boundaries. And that will ensure that your overarching rules for the organization are never crossed. So those are 2 tools that I think start becoming very useful at that stage when you're starting to grow, particularly when your team is evolving. You're learning more about all these AWS services, and you don't want to have rogue spend happen.
Just to add a horror story from slightly more than a decade ago, I was interacting with to keep the details to protect the guilty. I was interacting with the company, and they had a $20,000+ AWS spend, and they had developed their practice internally from scratch.
Okay.
They gave everybody internally and every consultant who ever walked in the door the root IAM credential. They had one IAM. They had, everyone had root keys, and so they had no idea what was going on. So, and it's if you didn't know, right? Why would you wander over to the IAM thing? You set it up once, you got your key and your secret, and off you go. Just slack it to anyone who needs it, and it was unnerving. So definitely, if you've overlooked that, set up IAM. Make sure there's IAM credentials. Don't just give the root IAM secret to everybody.
Yeah, that's definitely a good tip. Permission policies are, we call it proactive cost governance. The budgets and cost anomaly detection we mentioned earlier is kind of reactive, right? Things happened or about to be happening, pay attention.
I'm going to put a little highlight there on the lower screen. Proactive cost governance. That's a really good one.
Yeah, right. If you have the boundaries that Rahul mentioned, you kind of prevent that from happening, knowing that someone in your organization might experience some services that it's either not necessary or too expensive from a perspective. So that's definitely a good call. I was trying to think about in the same kind of scope of IAM actions or service control policies. AWS organization definitely has a lot of the feature. Control tower is another service if you want to have the multi-account organization structure with best practices and all the checks you mentioned. That definitely look into that. Within the cloud financial management services scope, last year we also launched something called granular IAM actions to manage the access to our individual CFM tools. Because you probably don't want everyone to have access to Cost Explorer and my budgets and my discount information, etc. Take maybe into consideration of all the narratives you want to control, right? Who gets to see what information? Maybe tax information is not so important for my engineering leaders, or discounts. I don't want to disclose all the discounts to all of my member accounts. That's kind of different things. I think Rahul, you mentioned is permission for access resources in order not to create some cost surprises down the road. I think for this IAM actions is we already have this information. How can I protect the billion cost information from my end users in order to have this kind of the story or the incentives you want to drive them into? Probably you don't want to have all the discounts available to people. People are like, I'm doing pretty good. But in reality, from the organization level, we're doing pretty good. But maybe within your department, you have a lot of the cost optimization opportunities you can drive. Yeah.
Couldn't agree more. One other thing to watch out for and keep an eye out. At this stage is where I've seen most organizations where their keys start leaking into either their GitHub repositories or wherever they decide to put their code and deploy stuff. So I think this is about the time when you really should spend the time to learn about the best practices around how to access your resources in AWS. You want to either use temporary keys, temporary sessions. There are multiple different ways of accessing it. Don't open up don't create these bastion hosts that you're using to access other stuff where everything is open so that you can access it from the world. There are tons of different ways, much more secure ways to do it. That will save you a lot of pain, both from a cost standpoint and also from a management standpoint of your resources. Keeping everything secure and safe, again, is one of the big pillars of how you deploy in AWS, and it's fundamentally different from how you did things in data centers. So that's something to kind of watch out for and keep an eye out for. There are tons of tools where as soon as a key reaches GitHub, you will get an alert, but make sure to look out for it. Make sure that you act on it almost immediately, because you'd be shocked how quickly a key can be picked up from a public GitHub repository and acted on, and people are, running away with all kinds of resource launches. It can be very painful. So that's something to watch out for at this stage.
You don't want to be subsidizing a Bitcoin mining farm.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah, definitely. Security, resilience, cost, availability. There's different things we are promoting this ideas of shifting to the left, right? When you're designing your architecture, you need to make sure the security and cost and every component is part of your consideration. Try to do as proactive as possible.
Putting up that banner again.
Yeah.
Proactive cost management.
Yes. Yeah.
Awesome. We have two more personas that we want to cover, but do we want to take a short break?
Yeah, let's take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and we're going to do bigger organizations, maturing organizations, and then really big ones.
Some tools just find AWS cost savings and make you do all the work. Visualizing cost opportunities is great, but that's not enough. CloudFix, on the other hand, actually delivers those savings for you. And you don't need to worry, because CloudFix uses AWS recommended savings techniques. It fixes, not just finds. It's the easiest way to save money on AWS. It's 100% automatic and risk-free. And the best part of all, it works non-stop. Stop overspending on AWS and click on the link to start saving now.
All right, we are back from the break. We had some awesome advice on what to do if you're just starting out or if you're a startup. So now we want to move on. Raul, can you introduce the third persona of this discussion?
Great. So the third persona is one where you start off as a startup, but then suddenly you hit the sweet spot of product market fit. And suddenly a Reddit post or some tweet that just went viral and people are hitting your service, you're growing like crazy. What are the best practices then? What should you look for? What are the tools that start becoming very important over here? I think we alluded to it, some of them right at the beginning. But let's look at that persona where you're growing like crazy. You may not have all the FinOps best practices in place yet, but what are the things that you should focus on?
Yeah, there's so many things. Like, first thing, we have to congratulate them, right? They finally got the stage they dreamed about, right? Their business is booming. It's all the nice things they have in place for their business. That time, I would suggest either designating someone in your organization or have someone wear multiple hats to start pay attention to FinOps. Right? At the very beginning, maybe you're just users. You try to use permissions to proactively control their usage. But if you start to have increasing bills, you might want to have someone who understands FinOps and different best practices. You might not be able to implement everything like end to end, but have someone at least own the FinOps practices for your organization. The reason why I said that is we discussed about earlier the KPIs, how important it is to have the ability to evaluate where you are. So definitely have this FinOps practitioner or FinOps professional to kind of set up the KPIs your organization care about. It could be my total cost to start with, right? It could be a budget number. It could be if you start to purchase savings plans, RIs, and what's my coverage rate, utilization rate looks like, because I want to utilize the things I already commit to spend. It could be the accuracy or variance between my forecasted number and my actual number. Whatever it is, maybe have your KPI dashboard and start to track that. That's just one thing. As you grow bigger and bigger, you want to make sure you still like acting on the efficiency targets you have set for yourself. And I realized that there's another area that I did not touch upon in the first half of the show, which is the whole planning pace. So we talk a lot about when I start to use, when I incur cost surprises, what shall I do, right? And all the things you can analyze with Cost Explorer and the curve and anomaly detection, the budgets. I realized I did not mention about the planning piece, which is, okay, you know you're going to spend a lot, right? Talk to your organizations. It could be marketing person who want to run some campaigns. It could be your leaders who want to expand to new regions. start to maybe talk to those business leaders, understanding their plan in the next few months or even years, and start to create your forecasting plan. So I think at this stage, forecasting is so important because you want to allocate your budget. So precious money, like where should I spend, right? Whether it's the business activities or maybe invest in cloud resources and make sure they have the ROI you want. So I think the forecasting piece becomes more important, and it also can be difficult to translate business requirements into AWS resources. Like, I want to run more campaigns. What does that mean, right? What services are you potentially going to leverage in order to support the business activities? And that's why FinOps practitioner or professional is so important, because they understand how to translate your business activities into the actual usage on AWS. And then they can use things such as pricing calculator, right? Then they can take a look at all the services I want to use, like how much more, what's the current usage, and how can I add additional input into those pricing calculator and be able to estimate the cost for you. So I think when you start to know that you are getting very serious of your investment, like forecasting accuracy gets more important, and the overall KPI tracking.
I couldn't agree more. I think those are very, very good tips and should absolutely be followed. Steven, you want to add any from your experience?
I guess the question I had is, okay, so say you've been in this startup mode, and sometimes you can be a bit fast and loose with things. You've got a demo tomorrow and it's 3 a.m.
Yeah.
But then you have a bit of breathing room now. Where do you see is the bang for your buck in terms of effort? Okay, like what's the type of things that people want to do as they mature? Is it Graviton migration? Is it right sizing? Where do you see the kind of bang for your buck at this stage?
That's a good plug for one of the services we have. Yes, every customer has different situation and how much you have maybe selected the old generation of services, etc. So you do not have to memorize all the latest generations and like the Graviton migration opportunities. You can just log into your billing cost management console and log into actually navigate into cost optimization hub. So that is the one-stop shop of all the potential cost savings opportunities for your organization. You can be a payer account owner. You can look at all the opportunities across your organization for all the member accounts and all the right sizing opportunities, whether it's for the compute services, for like machine learning services, etc. You'll be able to understand the potential savings opportunities. And if you want to convince your engineering teams, there's also an implementation effort. You can take a look to see how complex this cost savings opportunities for me to implement. And you can convince them intentionally. Do you want to work on those low-hanging fruits for the things you can do, and then more complex things?
Okay, yeah. So one of them might be Graviton migration, right? Where it's an estimate is, okay, maybe this isn't too much work given the size of your code base, or like maybe how many Lambda functions you have that are x86 that can estimate and say, okay, we're spending, I don't know, this much if we're using Intel-based Lambdas, and we can be spending that much, and is that worth that? Is that slice that you could save worth the engineering effort?
Exactly, because for each recommendation, there will be implementation effort and estimated cost savings. You can take a look at that, whether I want to invest that much effort for the potential savings per month. That's definitely a place for kind of mid-sized enterprises to take a look at, is using that as a KPI, like basically potential cost saving opportunities, percentage for your organization, right? Maybe you start with 60%. Oh gosh, there's a lot of opportunities, and drill down. And that thing is dynamic. As you start to use more services, always pay attention to the cost optimization opportunities you have.
Exactly. And I'm going to shamelessly plug CloudFix in right here, because that's one of the tools that just does that. While Cost Optimization Hub, as well as Compute Optimizer, provide amazing insights based on what is a safe, optimization to perform. The actual task of performing those sometimes gets tricky, and it's sometimes, very complex. And CloudFix helps you overcome that bridge relatively easily. So you can use all the insights that come from these tools that Bowen just mentioned, but you can use CloudFix to then implement those changes. I'm going to add one other slightly different tip. This is where you're starting to scale, and one of the big mistakes that I see for a lot of startups and a lot of newbies is the fact that they haven't thought about cloud architecture and the fact that it is fundamentally different from your data center architecture. A lot of applications I see are now hitting the tipping point where they're starting to grow, but they are not their entire architecture is not elastic in nature. Okay, they're running big monolithic, they built it as a monolithic application. Now suddenly it's grown, but their architecture doesn't grow or shrink, which is equally important from a cost efficiency standpoint. You can grow quite easily, but if you don't have the ability to also shrink back when all of that work, all of the customers are gone or the workload has come down, then you're going to be in big trouble. So making sure that your systems and your architecture is cloud native in the sense that it is elastic and at the same time it is event driven, because it's very hard to get to an elastic architecture without your architecture being event driven. So if you do those two things, I think you're in a much better position to scale up or down depending on the whims of a viral tweet or the way people react to your product if certain events happen or you roll out a feature. So I think having that capability, and then back to what you were saying, unit metrics start becoming important over here, because suddenly you're starting to see a lot more net spend. But what then becomes important is what is your cost per transaction. Mm-hmm. And if you're measuring that, then everything will probably be reasonable.
Exactly. Yes, that's definitely the partnership between the finance teams or the Cloud Center of Excellence team with your technology teams. Like you mentioned, you start to pay attention to architecture design, but at the same time, maybe the FinOps team can tell you all the potential cost optimization opportunities with the, let's say, using budgets, including your CloudFormation template. So the budget's already set in place before it even starts, incurring cost. So there's definitely lots of kind of integrated components across architecture design and cost and security, etc.
Agree. The last one, let's jump to the very last persona. So the biggest of the big, I'm talking about the top 100 customers at AWS. And I think speaking to a lot of them, they have, the amazing thing is every time we are at reInvent or at FinOps or any of these forums and you talk to some of these very, very large customers, you see challenges like you've never seen before, but at the same time, you see a lot of very deep, interesting insights about how they are looking at the problem, how they are tackling the problem. And it's not something that applies to everyone, but it's definitely, there's tons of learnings over there. So, Bowen, from your standpoint, what would you advise for these extremely large organizations that have adopted the cloud, they've gone all in,
right,
and they're making the most of these amazing resources and services? What should we learn from them?
I think for those customers, the good news for them is most likely to have dedicated account teams and dedicated like cost optimization specialists. For example, AWS, we do have a dedicated team for those strategic accounts, right? So you do have people who will give you advice on a regular basis. They'll meet with your team, let you know here all the opportunities you have, because in their case, they have pretty good organization structure, right? They have a very good tagging habits. They understand all the tools. They have even maybe create their own BI dashboard, because depending on whether they're all in on AWS or they're in a multi-cloud environment, most likely they have a dedicated team to process data across different sources. So in their case, I find a lot of those large organizations, FinOps teams, they are very active in community because they know the issue is so unique, but maybe another large enterprise will have the same similar pinpoint. I think I mentioned earlier about the Spinley conductor. It's basically just one input for the whole kind of cost allocation space. Because for those big enterprise, it's massive, right? They're organizing a massive army of different users. If they want to be fair in their chargeback and showback, they have to be very deep into allocating resources into specific business entities, and how can I share my shared resources, right? I think we launched the split cost allocation data last year, which is it's a big ask from customers, right? From all those container applications, we use the same EC2 instance. How can I, slice and dice that EC2 instance based on the end users consumption, right? The actually applications consumptions of that resources. So from those large enterprises, they need to really figure out maybe their initiative or the CFM campaigns of the year, right? Whether this year I want to focus on a very clean cost allocation and make sure that we leverage all the native services or solutions from partners to help us allocate that cost. Or I want to just hit my target of the most accurate forecasting possible, right? I can forecast the exact amount each month, maybe 2 to 3% variance of my actual spend. And then talk to my cost optimization specialist from my cloud service providers to identify more opportunities like the right sizing and migration opportunities to make sure my architecture is the most modern possible and leverage all the latest services. And just the community. I think you mentioned FinOps X. I think the reason why I think FinOps foundations are able to gather so many professionals together like on a regular basis is because people can share best practices with each other. And sometimes it's not maybe from AWS. Sometimes it's another we call whale-sized customer will be able to share the tips with you because they have already built we call homegrown solution. Those big whale customers, they actually can get data from cloud service provider and maybe leverage partner solutions, and they will also create some homegrown solutions. We have a customer from Latin. They're just massive, like kind of Amazon equivalent, and they actually have their internal like FinOps platform, almost like a service catalog. They will only allow certain services for for the end customers to use. They will be able to like report, send you like regular reports based on the KPIs they have already set. So they can be as creative as they want, obviously depending on the resources they have internally.
I'm thinking about the talks from FinOps X. A lot of them are people from FinOps teams or FinOps practice leads at these household names type organizations, right? Netflix, Disney, that sort of thing.
Yes, exactly.
Major banks.
Yes, exactly. Another thing is state of the FinOps survey. So they actually do it every year. So you can see it's very aligned across organization. What's the top thing I wanna focus on this year is reduce waste, like the things you mentioned over and over again, right? It sounds like you guys have a very automated ways to implement those like a waste reduction solutions or opportunities, and how can I empower my engineers to be more involved in my FinOps practices? What's the best way for me to forecast, etc.? So you will realize that yes, those enterprise are in the next stage or more mature stage, but they do share lots of common pinpoints. And that's why they're so actively involved in those community events and kind of best practice sharings.
Got it.
Yeah.
I have one tip that I think I've shared before, but I'm going to share it again in this context. So I completely agree with everything that you said, Bowen. I'm going to just add one other aspect is that when you get to be a very, very large org, from a FinOps standpoint, I find that most of these very large organizations are still stuck with cost allocation. And I think you need to kind of move away from cost allocation to chargeback. Now, the fundamental difference between those two is cost allocation is all about, hey, here was my cost. I want to allocate it fairly, like you said, to all the different divisions. But the biggest challenge of these very large organizations is that they are struggling to make sure that all the different parts of the organization are working in tandem, that they're all aligned, that they're all working towards the goals that this, cloud financial management or the FinOps team is actually trying to drive. And most of these teams are constantly running into friction. They're constantly running into teams telling them why something cannot be done or why something cannot be adopted. And that is a challenge at a very large level. Like here, you're talking about organizations that are spread across different continents, spread across different countries, and everyone operates like a different business unit. They have different P&Ls, they have different reporting structures. Then trying to get things to work, seamlessly is the biggest challenge at that scale. And so one of the things that I've found working, consulting with some of the top 10 AWS customers, uh, one of the things that works well, in my opinion, is chargeback. You don't need to be fair in terms of how you charge different BUs. You charge based on what objectives you really want to achieve. So, for example, if you say, I don't want anyone using non-graviton instances, okay, that's going to be a very unpopular decision to roll out across an entire organization. But you can use chargeback as a tool. So you as the CFO or the head of FinOps can say, that's totally fine. You use whatever instance type you want, but there is a 25% surcharge if you're using a non-graviton instance. And there is a 20% discount if you're using a graviton instance. So for the next quarter, this is our rule. You get incentivized to move to graviton. And it's totally fine if you decide that that's not the case. But the minute you do that, you find that everyone from the P&L owner to the business teams to the engineering teams get immediately aligned, because that's now starts sticking out as a big cost, which could potentially not be there at all, right? If you were finding the right incentives, or if you decide that you've got the right incentives, you will find that everyone gets aligned beautifully, very quickly, without fighting constantly internally. So that's one tip that I would give when you're at a large enough scale. You don't have to be fair. Like the whole notion that cost allocation has to be done in exactly the same ratio that you actually spend the money doesn't necessarily have to be the same way. You can start getting creative about it.
Yeah.
It's just another tool.
Incentivize the right behavior you want. You also mentioned that as a consultant, sometimes you see those frictions among departments. Another way we usually do is we have kind of we call FinHack workshop. So you actually go to this company and have them invite their stakeholders across different departments and teams, have them come together uninterrupted from their daily work and focus on, let's take a look at where your FinOps situation today is. Let's have a target of maybe a 2-day, 3-day workshop and work together to solve that. The whole idea of gamify this whole FinOps ideas is maybe do not let the FinOps person to be a policeman, to only say no or stop you from experimenting, right, in the kind of in cloud environment, making sure that you can like report, celebrate success, making sure all departments understand we actually work towards the same goal, which is saving monies, and we can incentivize you, like you said. If you use the right resources, we give you more discount. If you're not, right, you actually have more impact to your cost center, etc. I think that's a good idea. I know we're running maybe out of time. I just want to mention one last things for those big enterprise is the burden to normalize data across different sources. I think the whole idea is become behind the Focus initiative that's led by the FinOps Foundations is to normalize how we report and have the cost and usage data and the billing information according to the kind of same specification that aligned by all the cloud service providers and SaaS solution providers. So that's another thing they can kind of start paying attention to is how can they leverage those Focus compliant or conformed cost and usage data to save a lot of time by having those data in the same format across cloud service providers.
That's actually a really good point. Sorry, go ahead.
No. I think you've got a segue to the final 5 minutes that I wanted to ask about. If we're ready, do we have anything else to talk about on the big company levels?
In terms of focus?
Just in terms of FinOps, I guess.
Yeah.
The persona. I think we've covered that pretty well.
Okay. Yeah. So I think the reason why I brought up the idea of focus is we actually did launch the preview of data exports for Focus 1.0 specification. So they have the Focus specification G8 1.0 at the San Diego FinOps X. The whole idea is to make sure that you have the kind of consistent format of reporting and calculating cost and usage data so FinOps practitioners will have an easier time to process and normalize those data. So for that, it's definitely something like all the users, like everyone involved in the communities are very excited about this initiative, and how we as AWS as cloud service provider are also supporting this initiative and have the data exports available for customers to download the cost and usage data in that Focus 1.0 specification format. So I think data exports is just another thing we made available for customers, because you guys are very familiar with CUR, right? The cost and usage report. And last year, again, the 2023 reInvent is a big year. We launched the CUR 2.0 and data exports. So the idea behind that is to give customers the ability to customize how they want to select the columns and rows they need for their export, and be able to not only protect sensitive information. Maybe I can string out the information I do not want this data exports to include, reduce the size. That's also cost involved, right? Otherwise, your CUR can be massive, stored in your S3 in a bucket. And just to be very intentional to control the kind of data schema for your data pipeline. So that's definitely something I think large enterprise will look into, just because CUR 2.0 has offers so many more benefits. And how can you look into, we have a lot of resources online, how can you migrate from legacy CUR to CUR 2.0, and the focus is just another table that you can use data exports to download.
So how has that launch been received?
Very well, because customers are excited for the 2 additional columns that CUR 2.0 offered today, which is the payer account names and the usage account names. That's just like so much easier for them to pinpoint who is responsible for the cost, and the ability to use SQL query or the console visual editor to kind of select columns and rows. They're very, very excited. We do want to call out that customers are working on the migration plan, because if they're like very proficient with legacy CUR, they need to understand, how do I migrate to CUR 2.0, right? We do have lots of documentations online to tell you how can you export using the new schema, to maybe update your data pipeline to process the new schema. Because between CUR 2.0 and legacy CUR, one of the best benefit is the fixed data schema. So we have a lot of columns right now have kind of nested columns. You can extract them as separate columns, or you can download them as nested columns, but maybe extract them in your BI solutions dashboard, etc. So it's definitely an improved experience for data exports.
In conversation with a lot of AWS customers, I find that the ones who are most excited about this are the ones who are typically doing multi-cloud setups, where they are trying to correlate and combine data from multiple different cloud providers, and there the standardization of your columns and your data format makes so much sense. Where just mapping everything else would become so hard. If you were all in on AWS, would that make as much sense? Because the other tooling kind of already supports all of this stuff, right?
If you're only on the AWS, you do not need to pay attention to the focus table. But if you are in a data exports experience or console page, you will see the 3 different tables. We have CUR 2.0, legacy CUR, and the focus, and also cost optimization hub that we just mentioned also can have the data export experience. Then we will definitely highly encourage you to look into the CUR 2.0, which is much better, like controlled experience for you to export data for large enterprise customers to kind of have the data in their own hand. Maybe they can merge with their business data to have this unique economics calculation to import into their BI dashboard, etc. So data exports will be a powerful tool, and we are definitely investing heavily to make a lot more data available in data exports.
We'll have to read between the lines, and we'll have you back when something becomes public. We'd love to chat with you about that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
That is awesome. Thank you, Bowen, for spending the time to actually walk us through all of these different tools, all of these different scenarios, because like you said earlier, you're trying to make this easy for the audience, easy for them to consume. And this entire cloud financial management space is growing literally by the day, by the month. Like there's just so much learning that's coming in, both from the community and from AWS itself, that just keeping up with everything is hard. So thank you for simplifying this for us and making it easier for everyone to consume this. I think hopefully there'll be tons of interesting tips that people will take away depending on which stage of their cloud journey they are in.
Yeah. Thank you, Rahul.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you,
and
Stephen,
we
for
will
having me.
talk to you again.
Yeah. Talk to you soon.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.